Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big VC funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Sean Hoban, the former CEO and co founder of Kimble Applications. This is a UK based company based in London that created financial and project management software on top of Salesforce way back when for professional services organizations that have 50, hundreds of employees out there doing consulting. It's a totally different business model than SaaS and most others. And they've made software to manage that financially. They grew quite quickly coming out of that industry themselves, professional services, and built a very successful company. Took some growth equity, practical investment along the way, and grew the business to about 30 million before selling the majority of it to Accel-KKR in 2021. So it's a UK-based practical founder success story with Sean Hoban here. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, Sean.
Nice to meet you, Greg. Well, nice to meet you again, Greg.
Yeah, we saw each other. Gosh, has it already been a month ago? It seems like forever.
Yeah.
I was in London with some of the practical founders in my peer groups, including Simon Barry, whom you know, and we sat next to each other at a football match, the Fulham Tottenham match
We
over there.
we did indeed.
Yes, and I started to pick your brain about what you're doing, and you're another practical founder success story from the UK. So I'm excited to have you on today. What's new in the UK this week, Sean? What's the
W
report?
Oh, what's new? We got some good weather,
Oh
Greg,
my gosh,
which, we
that's
are,
news.
we're into I'm gonna put it into Fahrenheit for you guys over
Yeah.
there. We're into this, sort of mid-70s here.
Okay.
So,
Great.
it's good. Yeah, we're enjoying some good weather.
It's almost like the Costa del Sol is coming up to the south of
It
England.
is.
Yeah.
It's better weather here than it is in Spain at the moment, so we gotta
You
take
have
that.
electricity too. So how about
Yeah, we
that?
got exactly. My daughter just came back from Barcelona, and she just got out. She just got out. It was quite hairy to get out. So, yeah, we've got electricity and we've got the weather. Hey, don't need to go anywhere. As someone said to me, I think it no, Samuel Johnson, I think, said, "If you're bored of London, you're bored of life." So I love
Yes.
being in
Oh,
London.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, my wife and I go to London, quite a bit, and, every time it's interesting and exciting, so
yeah.
I totally agree with that. Isn't it funny how we do these crazy adventures of, starting companies, growing them, create global operations, all this kinda stuff, and we take for granted all the infrastructure, flights, electricity, right? Spain literally went down, like, the
Yeah.
roads and stoplights and hospitals and everything,
And just
so
just getting, some of my daughter's friends who are trying to get a cab, and they don't have cash anymore. And the taxi driver couldn't take a card, the cash points weren't
right,
working. I
right,
mean, we're in a cashless society, aren't we, right?
right.
And but when everything goes down, cash is king, I guess.
All right, cash is king, and that's a founder's kind of word there.
Yeah.
You were a practical founder and bootstrapped your company, Kimble Applications, which you sold in a few bites, and I guess you're still part owner of. Did that PE first, second, third bite kind of game. Let's just start with what is and was Kimble Applications. I know it's been renamed now since you sold it.
Yeah, Kimble Applications, now called Kontata SX, which is they have
Okay.
2 products, a professional service automation solution. So serving mid-market and enterprise professional services firms, really managing the whole life cycle of operations from managing proposal generation, resourcing, project delivery, time and expense capture through to then billing and recognizing revenue. So it was, if you like, it was the ERP, or still is, the ERP for professional services. So the glue between, your CRM and your ledgers at the back end. So really
Ah,
everything in the middle.
and was it, project management, in between there to coordinate who's doing what and tracking of time, in services is, of course, important for revenue recognition, and did it do all of that thing as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So it had various ways of managing projects. from, iterative agile through to, classic waterfall type approaches. So it has the project management capability or delivery management
Right.
within it. But I think it's way more than that. If
Yeah.
you're a services firm, you care about margin, you care about cost, you care about cash, depending on the size you are. And it's how your project delivery feeds into all of that.
Right.
So, maximizing your utilization by resourcing early, making sure you got the right cost resource on the projects, that kind of thing.
And so previously, I presume if you had, 100 professional services folks in different countries doing SAP implementations or Oracle implementations or all that enterprise stuff, right? And you get the 20 people for 2 years, kind of thing, or 10 people. Doing, Salesforce plus project management software coordination plus some kind of ERP accounting software didn't really solve the problem of what exactly is going on in my professional services business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of the old school, so I mean, it's a category that's been around for a long time,
Yeah.
professional service automation, but the way it's been, addressed has been very, I would call it sort of finance backward looking kind of approach. I don't mean backward looking in a derogatory sense. I
No, no, that's
mean
welcome to accounting. Yes.
I mean that a lot of businesses, professional services business, were run by looking at the financials that is a month out of date.
Right,
It's happened. It's historic. It's looking through the rearview mirror.
right.
If you want to manage a services business properly, you want to look through the windshield and see what's coming. So you need to be able to use the interaction with your sales pipeline to forecast what's going to happen in your business from a revenue, from a cost, from a margin, from a utilization perspective. And then ultimately that becomes actuals, which is great. And then that does feed into the finance system. But it's a different approach to how use the tools to manage the business. You're better off managing the business by looking forward. Where's my cliff in the business? Where's my, utilization on my revenue dropping, and seeing that in advance rather than a month after the board pack has been produced with the, with the figures in. So we were big believers, or still are big believers in, you'll maximize utilization by looking forward and looking for, what resources are coming available, what opportunities you've got, and resourcing those before they actually happen. And that will move your utilization by a couple of percentage points at least. But we're not here to talk about professional services, but
No, I
I
mean,
can,
you're a let's say you're an expert in here. We'll talk about your background, in a minute, that you learn all of that.
yeah.
So you could almost say it's a vertical solution. Were these IT kind of professional services that
Yeah, they were. I
implemented
mean,
all of this, or was there
it's
all kinds of things?
all kinds of things actually. It's really
Oh,
interesting because when we set up the business, we very much thought it was the IT services management consulting type organization that had that problem, because that was where we had been operating. We were running those sorts of businesses
right,
before, the
right.
founders. So that was clearly the market we were looking at. But when you start having a product out there and you start getting inbound, you realize that actually that use case of, managing projects, managing people, where people are the asset of the firm, the main asset of the
Right.
firm, does wider use cases than just wider
Ah,
verticals than just IT services management consulting. So we had, for example, clinical research organizations.
oh,
They have very, very similar use cases. We'd find tech firms where they've got a services arm to them. So they're a product company, a tech product
right,
company,
right.
but to enable their product, they've got a services arm to their business, which sometimes is quite significant in some of the bigger tech firms, the likes of Hitachi and, some of the big software firms. They've got a huge services arm. And they've got the same problem. They need to manage
Right.
their resources efficiently. They haven't maybe got the same drive for profit that a pure play professional services has, but they've got a need to mobilize their product quickly and recognize revenue from their product quickly. So they have a need to have resource management, to have delivery governance, and all the rest of it.
Okay. Well, we'll get into that. You eventually sold the majority of this company to private equity and a couple bites there. How big was the company with revenue and employees, and customers, if you could say, when the final merger with Maven Link, coordinated by Accel-KKR, your private equity?
Sure.
Initially minority investor turned majority. But how big was the company in 2021 when that
So in
bigger transaction?
2021, we were around the I'm gonna try and do the conversion into dollars as
Yeah.
well, but we
Yeah.
were around 23 to 25 million sterling, which is around $30
Yeah.
million dollars revenues. We had about 300 customers at the time. We were about 140, 150 people globally at the time.
And did you have any professional services in your organization that did
We
that
did indeed.
onboarding and ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely. And, really, I think it's a really interesting one for your listeners, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
we, uh, it's for our product because it was a sort of an enterprise, quite sophisticated product to implement because there was
Okay.
a lot of configurability. So it's important that for your LTV, you
Yes.
really need to make sure it's put in and it's put in really well and it's adopted, and to make sure it's adopted, you've gotta do the professional services properly.
Right.
It's not just, "Here you go, here's the manual, read it." It took a you need to take that customer on a journey to make sure that you're really implementing it and they're getting the benefit that they think they're gonna get, so
Right.
that ultimately the renewal becomes a frictionless renewal.
Right.
So obviously you're trying to sign initially quite a long-term contract, but to buy yourself enough time to make sure it's really sticky. But
Yeah.
once it's in an enterprise
Oh, it
solution like
never
that,
goes away.
it's in, it's not going anywhere. So the professional services becomes super important to make sure it's put in properly. Then customer success obviously needs to follow up on that. But, I think we found that I think in the early days, we probably were a little bit light on the professional services, and, we're hoping the customer did more. And
Yeah.
the reality is the
That's
customer
common.
need hand-holding through that process, continually hand-holding. And so we've invested in it. But I think the important thing is you can't overinvest in it either, because if you're losing money on your professional services, that is at the cost of sales and marketing,
Yeah.
your cash.
Yeah.
So
Robbing Peter. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So we had a sort of a rule of thumb towards the end. We want to be around 20% margin on the services, which roughly is washing its face,
Yes.
you
Right.
know. If we were 15%, we wouldn't stress about it, but we didn't want to be 50%.
Yeah.
Because we're not a professional services business, we're a software
Yeah.
business.
Well, it's a
Yeah,
classic case, and everybody discovered this in SaaS, that, you know, services are good and onboarding is good if it makes your license sticky and permanent, right? So
yeah.
it's worth it. And you choose the profitability of your professional services, and you had that dialed in, I'm sure, with your own technology there. What percentage of revenue roughly was the services to your software? Another classic question.
Well, at the end, we were obviously at the beginning, the
Yeah.
services is quite a high percentage of the
Yeah.
revenue as you're building up the annuity business. At the end, we were about 20%, 25%
Yeah.
services revenue, 20%, about 20%.
And that was
Um,
kind of a that's a classic, percentage for
yeah,
enterprise that is
yeah.
efficiently run and not trying to not doesn't require too much ongoing, services there. What was the average, revenue per customer, at that point? Was that
It was
uh
about, I mean, dollars, it was about $100K
okay,
per
yeah,
customer ARR. And that obviously, all your listeners will know this as well, but, that just sort of kept growing and growing and growing, and that was we
yeah,
wanted to be more and more enterprise, and so
yeah,
that was one of our KPIs, was the ARPA. I think that's a really key metric, if you're on a trajectory for, I guess, enterprise scale rather than, huge volume. So it depends on your what your game is, but, we
yeah.
wanted that to grow, but without having too much, sort of concentration risk. So, but I think
Yes. All that
but we
yeah.
had 300 odd customers, so we're not really in a concentration risk issue at that point, but,
Well, that
so
sounds like a very valuable company, right? Becoming the leaders at this forward-looking practice of managing professional services, uh, accelerating 300 customers with very low churn. You've kind of figured out the product and the onboarding and the selling and so forth, and an increasing lifetime value or average ACV, average contract value. sold the company in a couple bites there. What can you say about selling, you know, 30 to $35 million accelerating SaaS company in the heyday, 2021, right?
Well, I think, it wasn't deliberate or
Yeah, yeah.
strategic at all, but, so I think, that if the truth be told, we, myself and my other 2 founders, we got through COVID, and COVID was pretty tough, and I'm sure
Ah,
a lot of your listeners felt the same. It
yeah.
was quite a stressful period, and, we felt the business was in good shape, we're growing, it was growing good at a good rate. But I think we felt the analogy I use is we're running around a racetrack. We didn't know whether we're doing a 400-meter sprint or whether we're doing a 10,000-meter long distance run. And but we were sprinting. We
Yeah,
were
okay.
sprinting
There
all
we
the
go.
time.
Mhm.
It was like, you're on. It's 24/7. You're always on. And we just thought, like, I think we need to find some way, not way out, because we were passionate about the business, but we felt we needed to sort of, for our own sanity, sort of, look
Yeah,
to sell the business. So we basically talked to the board and said, "Look, I think we're looking at appointing some advisors, some bankers here to run a process." We'd done a little bit of a beauty parade on some of the bankers,
and
some ones that I knew in London, but they're also were in the US. And we were gearing up for that, and we knew that, the business was in good shape at that point, and we knew maybe in a couple of quarters' time, we'd probably start to run a process. And then our minority investor, Accel-KKR, came in with a preemptive, "We don't want you to go to market. We want to take a
okay, that
majority
happens.
position."
Yeah,
And that happened. And we had a little bit of a backwards and forwards.
yeah,
We knew roughly the sort of price we wanted. And maybe if we got the bankers, advised involved, we might have got a little bit more. But we sort of knew pretty much what industry was at that time.
yeah,
And by the time you paid the bankers as well, and, it just felt
yeah,
like, and we had a good relationship with Accel-KKR. So, we felt that it was for the rest of the employees, which becomes very important
yeah,
to you as well. It's not just about the money, it's about, the people that you're, are gonna be in the business, that helped you get the business to this. You want, I think, decent owners of the business at that point. And, we felt that, they understood SaaS, they understood the business because 'cause they'd been around since they did a minority. Therefore, we were sort of handing the business over to, some people who had, had a good understanding of the business.
so can you say about how much that was? We can do our calculations for what was a practical valuation in 2021, a hot era
Yeah,
for a growing company that's sizable, right? This was
yeah.
a small company.
So we were in the multiple ranges of 6 to 8. So we were, in terms
Okay.
of,
Yeah,
so
people can
pretty,
do the math on
I
that.
think pretty on it. I look at, the one in 2021 anyway, the ones that would attract maybe the 10x would be either smaller companies, or their
Yeah,
growth rate would be a lot
yeah,
higher than we were. We were growing at a good rate we were
yeah,
comfortable with, but we weren't 100% year-on-year growth.
yeah,
Um, so, well, we felt at the time, and actually in hindsight now, not a bad multiple given,
yeah.
I think what the SaaS averages are nowadays. But, yeah, we were
Well,
happy with
another
it.
thing that people don't consider, when you have the optionality because you didn't have big VC funding, we can talk about that as well, but to take a deal rather than, double down and take another 5 years at it.
Yeah, and,
You had this prize, let's say, 4 years ago, right? So you've been multiplying it since then, presumably.
yeah, well, I'm still an investor as well. So, I want
Yeah,
I rolled some of my equity into the go forward business in the
yeah,
typical way private equity do that. They
yep,
create a new top co, and then, you roll into the top co. So I'm still passionate for the business, and I've still got some investment in that business, but I want it's more about, for me, it was more about, freeing up some of the, monies
yep.
there, but it's a time thing as well. I think all your listeners will know that it's 24/7 when you're a founder running a business. And
A global business, right?
yeah, global
Australia's
business,
calling, right? Mhm.
exactly. Yeah, and you're flying around and you get tired, and sometimes there's other priorities in life, and I think the three of us, that myself and my two co-founders, felt, actually it was a good time to not hang up our not hang up our boots, but but maybe just to take things a little easier and enjoy some of the fruits of our labors.
That's great. Well, very exciting. Congratulations on a successful journey. And I guess we should say this was a Salesforce application, right? You played that whole, um, app exchange game and, the enterprise partnering, but it was built on top of the Salesforce platform. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Okay.
I guess slightly fortuitous at the time. So one of our angel investors right at the beginning was
Hmm.
a gentleman by the name of Steve Garnett, who happened to be at the time chairman for Salesforce in EMEA.
Oh, right.
And he had invested in one of our services firms before, and he was very keen to invest in Kimble. But he did say to me and Dave Scott, my CTO, have a look at the platform. This was quite early on in the
Mhm.
Salesforce platform.
Yes. When it was turning into a platform you could build apps on. Right.
Yeah. So we kicked the tires on it, and we went, and my CTO got lots of experience building Oracle, Java, .NET,
Yeah.
we were planning on doing a .NET solution really. But looked at the platform, thought, actually we can get to market a lot
Awesome.
quicker. And that was true. We were 6 months, we had version one with paying customers on the platform.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those
So
were the days, and so this is the beginning of the acceleration, I call them practical founders, bootstrapped and lightly funded. You don't need VC funding because the cost of building sellable, usable, you know, amazing apps has been going straight down for
absolutely.
almost 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you don't need a pile of VC investment to get 30 engineers to build version 1 anymore, and
Yeah.
that's really amazing. So is it still run on Salesforce these
It
days?
is, yeah,
Okay,
it
yeah.
is. It's still run on Salesforce, and, that has its challenges sometimes because the
Yeah,
way the platform works, it's got
right.
governor limits and
Yeah.
but I mean, my CTO would talk to this a lot better, but you gotta learn not to fight against the platform, go with it, and, and he did some amazing stuff, so we managed to do a lot of stuff asynchronously, and so we
Yeah,
get round the governor limits, and we've got customers now with, 10,000 users running, so submitting all their time, doing all their billing,
right,
generating the revenue, on the Salesforce platform, and some of our customers don't have Salesforce.
right,
Majority
right.
do because our ICP,
Yeah,
most of those people were would have Salesforce
right,
as a CRM solution anyway. So that makes it easy if they're already used to using Salesforce, but they didn't have to. We were an OEM ISV, so they didn't have to have bought Salesforce licenses to have Kimball.
right. So
And
you sold it as its own app, and you said it runs on force.com, but you don't need to deal with that, right? All of that.
yeah.
Salesforce did that very successfully from an app to this platform and then the ecosystem. Was a major part of your go-to-market, the Salesforce ecosystem, the other partners, Salesforce salespeople themselves,
I'd
the
say it's
marketplace?
part of it. I'd say it's part of it, but my sort of message to people that are in that ecosystem, never rely on
Yeah,
Salesforce as a channel. Think of it as yes, there's some potential channel there,
yeah,
but you've got to have your own direct sales and your own go to markets, and you
yeah,
can't. It depends on the app. Yeah, it
yeah, yeah,
depends on the app. But we had our own direct sales, our own, business development, direct marketing, etc.
right. So let's go back here. You, spent years in the professional services, business. All this, heavy, enterprise software required sometimes bus loads, maybe it's fewer these days, of, professional services consultants to implement. Oracle and way back in the day, Siebel CRM before Salesforce and, all kinds of things. Is that your background here?
Yeah, I did a few years working for Ford Motor Company as a systems analyst when that was a role that
Yeah.
existed.
Uh-huh.
But then I went and I was working for Oracle in Oracle Consulting for a while.
Yeah.
So implementing Oracle solutions, a lot of it was their e-business suite, which I don't know what that's called nowadays, but and then some startup consulting firms,
Hmm.
and help grow some of those. And the last one we had, we sold in 2008 to Hitachi Consulting.
Wow.
But predominantly the services we were providing were a combination of management consulting and technical. So it would be, definitely not the McKinsey level, but it would be coming in and looking at sort of process reengineering, but
Hmm.
then implementing the right product or solutions to solve that process need. So a lot of the time there was a lot of Oracle stuff in there. But also, yeah, we built custom solutions for customers as well, depending on the needs.
Okay. So, and this is that huge world of consulting and IT consulting that hangs out around all this software. About how much were you billing, one of your staff consultants at that point?
Oh,
Was that like
blimey.
200 pounds an hour back then, or was
Yeah,
that?
well, this is a big difference in professional services. The UK historically has dealt in days rather than hours, and the
Oh,
US will always be in hours. So I'll do a
okay.
little bit
Right.
of
Okay. That's right.
I'll
Because
do
the
a little bit
common
of a conver
denominator, right?
So I think the top back then, so this is going back a while, a good rate would be £1,000 a day. So
Right.
what's that? That's we would
Yeah.
take an 8-hour day. So
Looks like
that's
a $200 a day
yeah,
kind of thing,
yeah.
something like that.
And
Okay.
that's
Great.
a good rate. And then the more junior, maybe £600 a day.
Yeah.
But that was the range. And I actually, I think what's happened in professional services is that there's been a lot of rate pressure over the last
Ah.
few years with offshore. So
Uh-huh.
a lot of
Sure.
this was pre-offshore. I mean, I set up an
Yeah.
Indian offshore team for our last services business because we were, trying to look at that classic pyramid model and how we could reduce the cost
Yeah.
in the so I suspect rates now are clearly they would have gone up a bit, but maybe not in line with everything else.
Yeah. Well, and so I could just imagine, all the suit and tie consultants running around London, right, to the big offices and camping out at clients' offices and, all of that.
Yeah.
So were you guys well above average in running these kind of businesses? You saw the mechanics, you sold these professional services business. Did you have above average insights about how to run these that eventually turned into your software, or you were just
I'd hope so, Greg.
okay,
Yeah, I
okay,
think I think we had a point of view on how to run a services firms,
okay,
which I guess drove some of the initial product roadmap and features and functions in our so what
right.
I talked about before is sort of,
Uh-huh.
having a forward visibility as well as a rear view visibility of the business. And that was something we were passionate about when we're running startup services firms because it's a cash hungry business
Yes.
really. You're paying salaries maybe before you've got revenue coming in. So knowing that, you know, is super critical.
Yeah.
So I think we went into creating Kimble with a clear point of view on how services firms what best practice look like on
Right.
services firms. But clearly, when we get the product out there, we've taken a lot of customer feedback, and the product evolved hugely through that customer feedback and stuff that we always wanted to put in the roadmap. But making sure we were including and I always used to say we're going to build what the customer needs, not what they want, because
Okay.
sometimes a customer can't articulate they think they want something, but actually what they need is this. And
Mhm.
so our job was to
There's the
translate
true consultant coming out, Sean, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
it's translating the want into need and
Yeah.
making sure that's gonna drive benefit for them,
Yeah.
and that was a key thing. If they're getting benefit, then they're gonna keep renewing the software.
So how did you make that turn? I just wrote this week, again about the challenge of successful services company owners turning, creating products and then getting it, creating a product business out of that, getting out of the service business. It's a well-worn path, very difficult, but you were you had used some kind of software, some kind of approach in your business that's successful. You had the hypothesis that everybody else wanted this forward-looking approach to managing the business. Did you have to go out there and knock on doors and say, "If we built this, would you come?" or prototype it? Or did you just say, "We know what version 1 is, let's go build it and get out there?"
No, no, we actually ran before we had started coding, we
Okay.
ran some workshops, one in the UK and one in the
Ah,
US, and we got people we knew in the industry, and
yeah,
we did the classic Post-its and whiteboard
okay.
to really flush out what, to check our point of view really,
Right.
but
Okay.
also to get input as well. And then, so that really sort of, I guess, started to form the roadmap by having that input from those initial workshops. But then I mean, the truth is, we were out selling the product before it was built. And what I mean by that is, myself and one of my co-founders will be out talking to our network, saying, "Look, this is our product. Show them what we've built so far. Is that something?" So we had people ready to buy, and Salesforce were the thing that slowed us down in the end, actually, because it had to
Uh,
go through security clearance. We had a
okay.
customer ready to pay, and we were waiting on Salesforce. But because we'd been involving them, showing them what we had, as we were developing the product. So it was
So it's
classic.
that classic, "I wanna run something by you to get your feedback,"
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
turned into the sales call,
Absolutely,
consultative sale.
absolutely. And that's we've carried. That on all the way through. I think it's a great sales strategy, isn't it?
That's right. So and you started this with 2 other co-founders, the 3 musketeers who had worked together before. So you
Yep,
guys were known quantities. I guess Mark was the sales guy and
yeah,
Dave was the technical whiz.
yeah,
What was your
absolutely.
role in there, Sean? Do you know?
Well, that's a very good question, you
Yeah.
see, Greg. Some would say the jack of all trades, master of none, but,
Okay. The
um,
CEO, right, yeah,
no, I became the CEO, yeah, no.
yeah,
So I guess some of the operational and delivery side of the business was I would tend to spend more time in that. But, we worked together externally, I was the CEO,
yeah,
clearly. But we worked together very closely and we made decisions together. We chatted things through. It wasn't a command and control from me. It was the three of us would work together and we knew our different strengths and weaknesses. So we'd respect that, and I think we would get consensus. 90 odd percent of the time we'd have consensus, so
I
very
see.
little disagreement.
How long had the 3 of you worked together? And I guess multiple times,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it all goes back to Oracle, actually. So
Ah,
we all worked at Oracle, and then actually, Mark, my co-founder, he set up a services business. Dave and I had set up a little software business.
mm,
We ended up getting acquired by the services business, and then I became a director there. And so it was all. But we've known each other. How long? We'd probably known each other 15 years or so. Before we
okay.
set up Kimble. So we knew each other well.
Did you have a feeling like, uh, you know this industry, you've been successful, you know these people, Salesforce seems to work, like, and you could get there quickly. Did you have a sense that this was gonna go or, quit your day jobs and get this moving and
Yeah, well, I think the starting point was we had sold our business to our services business, a company called Edenbrook, to Hitachi Consulting, and they then asked me to run the UK and that made me have to stop and think, do I want to do this?
Ah,
It was good salary, but big corporate. And I'm not great having bosses. Most of my
oh,
time
yeah,
I've had
a
bosses,
pirate,
but
not a corporate. Yeah,
yeah. So I basically thought, "No, I can't do this. I can't do it." So I then turned to Dave and Mark and said, "Look, I think, I'm not gonna do this. I've got an idea. How about this?" And
okay.
they went, "Yeah, okay, let's do it."
Yep,
So I did, but I think the critical point was I'd been asked to take the job of running the UK, and I just thought, "Nah, it's
yeah,
not quite for me." I like building stuff, like all
yeah.
much more fun building stuff than running something where, it's a faceless organization at that point.
This podcast is sponsored by my friends at Cypress Growth Capital. At some point in your growth, you'll know you could grow faster with some outside funding, but selling a part of your company to VCs would change your whole game. And we know that's the most expensive growth capital on the planet. That's why so many practical SaaS founders I know have partnered with Cypress Growth Capital when they hit that predictable growth inflection point. For 15 years, Cypress has provided non-dilutive, growth funding to bootstrap SaaS founders, including 6 successful founders I've interviewed here on this podcast. Cypress provides enough patient capital for you to invest in your growth without giving up any of your precious equity. They leverage their entrepreneurial and operational experience to provide savvy strategic guidance to help you grow efficiently and build your valuable software company faster. Go to cypressgrowthcapital.com/practical to learn more and set up a time with Cliff Centel to see if there's a fit. Now back to our program. Maybe that's who you were selling to in the end, right? These large,
Yeah, yeah,
people
exactly.
organizations, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing. So, right. So that's how revolutions go like this. Um, did, uh, did you need investment to get started, or you just all said, let's start working on it, let's sell it?
Well, we
Yeah.
started working on it, I guess, in terms of the design concept, but we needed to hire some developers, and we knew we wanted to get going quite quickly. So we took some angel investment
Okay.
from people, and there was 2 reasons for that actually. 1, the money, but 2, it was a great network for ultimately who we wanted to
Yeah.
sell into. So we were getting people in our industry to invest in us, and a lot of them either then became employees or became customers or
Yeah.
became big advocates for our
Yeah.
product. And then I talked about, Steve Garnett on he was one of our early investors, angel investors, and he was very, senior at Salesforce, so that was
Yeah.
useful as well. We
Right.
had somebody who could help us navigate Salesforce. So I think the money was, that angel investment
Mm.
served multiple purposes. Obviously primarily the money, which allowed us to hire some people and get some marketing going and all of that stuff. But it
How
was
much
also
did you raise, Sean, roughly?
we went out looking for £800,000. We were
Mhm.
oversubscribed by
Yeah.
quite a lot. We didn't take everything that we had offered, but we took a little bit more than the 800,
Yeah.
because the advice I always got, rightly or wrongly, was if it's on offer, take it. But I didn't take it all. I decided no. And also there's naivety at that time. We'd run services firms, and
Cash.
the whole model is different, and
Mhm.
the whole model is
You
different.
don't know what you're getting into.
You don't know what you're getting into, but if I looked at my P&L from the first day to what I would write as a P&L now for a SaaS
I
firm,
definitely.
so different,
So
so
what
different.
year was that when you guys locked arms and said, "Let's start selling this thing," and got into market?
2010, so we
2010.
2010, so we didn't formally we were working on it really from the summer of 2010 and starting talking to people
Yeah.
designing it. But then we formally incorporated the company at the end of 2010, and that's when we took the angel money at the end of 2010. And then first paying customer, June 2011. So we were, literally
There you
6
go.
months.
Yeah.
There you go.
And
Um,
were they annual contracts as well, presumably?
well, yeah, they were, and this was a lesson which I'm sure a lot of your guys know. We just didn't think people would pay for 12 months upfront either. So we would do annual contracts rather than 3, and now it defaults a 3-year contract.
Oh, right, I see. Mhm.
Is that now, sales guys will get, penalized if they sell less than a 3-year.
Right, I see, right. It's
But it
negative.
would but we would do a year contract, and we'd do quarterly in advance, and we thought we were being, absolutely outrageous charging a quarter in advance. But Salesforce had set the precedent. They charged
Yeah,
annually in advance, but we
right.
didn't feel the courage. But
Yeah.
then we did. But,
Yeah, but
a year
yeah.
later, we don't know why, just charge them a year up
Well,
front.
I was there in 2010 and 2011. SaaS was just starting. VCs were starting to understand this recurring revenue business model, like see new P&Ls and ask things like, "Why are we spending on so much on marketing if it pays only a fraction in the next year?" And learning what churn was. Of course, it's much more detailed that everybody's 7 levels down. But did you have a sense for what I mean, you're kind of a financial guy, you may literally
Yeah.
sold financial software, but, did you have a sense for the mechanics of the SaaS model that were so different than the mechanics of the private
I guess
professional services model?
we learned pretty quickly that actually, and I got a lot of intel at the time from Bessemer. Bessemer did
Oh, great.
a brilliant paper in
Yeah,
2010. I
yeah.
can't remember what it was called now, maybe called the Startup Genome or something
Yeah.
like that,
Mhm.
and it had all of the SaaS metrics were explained, and I just, I hoovered up that
Oh,
kind
right.
of and so I Bessemer were my go-to at that point in time. There wasn't much else being written then,
Yeah, that's right.
so then, we're looking at CAC, we're looking at CLTV,
Yeah,
look churn, obviously, gross and net,
yeah,
within a couple of years, I was a data
yeah.
nerd, on that sort of stuff.
Well, did you have the, let's say, the recurring revenue SaaS metric, SaaS model epiphany, which is you finally see it and you say, "Oh my God, this is amazing. If we keep customers for 5 or 10 years and we could acquire and pay it back at 18 months, our customer
Yeah,
acquisition, and the margins were so much different than professional services and recurring revenue, you show up with 92% of your revenue every." I
yeah.
mean, were you just ecstatic when you saw this thing, or
I
was
wouldn't.
it just a cash starvation problem at the
Well,
first?
I sort of I got it quite quickly, the model, but then I thought, well, we're down here in terms of our recurring revenue, and I
I
need
see.
to get it up here,
Yeah, okay.
So it
Yeah.
was then,
Slow
and
start.
how do we get it up there? Oh, we need sales and marketing, and
Right, and we're back.
but you totally get it, and you go, actually, when this flywheel starts
Yeah,
spinning, this is, I always used to say, if you, well, I still say it as when I do advisory stuff. Look, you can spin off quite a lot of cash if you get these businesses right. And,
yes.
it's not that, because you're billing annually in advance, so
Mhm.
think of if you get it right, you spin off that cash by the annual in advance, you can invest that in growth and you get
Right.
that flywheel effect,
Yeah,
and that's great. But you've gotta understand that and you've got to
yeah,
invest in the right places.
yeah.
Um,
That's great. Well, yeah, and
yeah,
so you're raised some angel funding, so not a ton there. You didn't raise
yeah.
VC funding. Was this all in the EIS scheme in the UK that gives tax advantages to the investors and all?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, and it's a godsend,
Yeah.
because it sort of de-risks it massively for the angel investors,
Is it literally tax-free or some type of tax
so
advantage on?
it's they get, if they've paid income tax, they'll get, in those days, it was 30%. So if you've paid income tax to the value 30% of the value of your investment, you get that back. So really, you're only investing 70% of your share
Yeah.
allotment.
Yeah, get a discount already, yeah.
You got a discount already. If the company goes bust, they can offset that against
Oh,
future taxes. But importantly, if the business goes well, they pay 0 capital gains tax on the way out. So
wow.
as long as they've held and as long as the company's still qualifying under EIS and it's been held for 3 years, it's 0 capital gains on the way out. So
Wow.
that's massively attractive,
Yes.
for angel investors, and, I think it's definitely helped, in the UK, where maybe access to VC money historically hasn't been so available, and angel investment, you need to de-risk it, and the
Yeah,
government 20 odd years
yeah,
ago decided to de-risk that for
yeah.
angel investors, and it gives you that sort of funding gap at the bottom then can be dealt with by angels.
Did you ever consider VC funding early, mid, late? There are some active US VCs in London and London VCs.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a VC scene there.
there is, and we got, I think what this is again, I mean, Salesforce, I suppose, gives with the Salesforce app exchange,
Yeah.
there's certain visibility
Yeah.
in the US, and and people are watching the space. So we get quite a lot of inbound interest from VCs all the way through, really. I wouldn't, maybe not for the first year because we no one
Yes,
knew us
right.
in the first year, but maybe after the first year, then it would start to be a trickle, and then it was regular inbound, and I would just
Why
fill.
didn't you take the VC funding, offer? I mean, were you fill it you could see your business model, you could, cash flow this efficiently and do it at your in you didn't did you were concerned about control or
No,
expectations, the math?
uh, um, I think I always used to sort of say, if we took some money, do we know what we would do with it?
Ah,
And I
that.
think that's the fundamental question you've got to ask, is if you know how you're going to deploy that cash and it's going to get you to a better result in the end, then that's probably a good time to take it. I think we knew that there was immaturity in the business, and
Mm.
so I think the ultimate answer is if you can put a dollar in the top of your sales and marketing machine and you know what you're gonna get out the bottom, then that's the time to take money, isn't it?
Right.
Where and you know it all flows and everything's working. But I think we didn't have solid foundations across the whole business. So there's things, and maybe this was a sort of a slightly cautious British approach. You know, we feel we need to
No.
have these things right before.
Yeah, that's actually served you very well versus the, do what everybody says we should do, just take the VC funding that didn't work out so well for so many
Yeah,
American software companies.
I think unless you've done it before and it's not your first rodeo, you could burn a lot of cash
Oh,
trying
yeah.
things and seeing not just product market fit, because that's the obvious one that people say, but I think lots of other things, like professional services. How does your professional services really work? And getting that right, getting your marketing right, getting your sales process right. There's so many things that you go, oh God, we haven't worked that out yet. We knew what we think we needed to do to fix it, but we didn't feel, we if we took money on, it would be inefficient use of that money, if that makes
Well,
sense.
isn't that's a little ironic. A lot of founders here, well, if I had it all figured out, I wouldn't need the money, right? But you did the right math and said, I need to figure it out so I know that I'll get the payback on the money without
Yeah.
the risk and so forth. But, by the time you figure those things out, then you're kind of profitable and running, I guess, at
Yeah.
some point. Something was,
Well,
did you?
I think the profit thing is a really interesting one, because I would say the goal is cash break even as opposed to profit.
Right.
Because I think you can run a non-profitable but cash neutral business in the SaaS world
Yes.
and still maintain a good
Yeah.
growth
You're
rate.
feeding the flywheel.
You're feeding the
And
flywheel,
yeah.
and that I think knowing, if you knowing what that point is, then you can go, well, could we? Then you ask yourself your question: could we go faster?
Yes.
And so that's that. Then if you think, well, we're constrained in our growth now because we haven't got the capital to put in the top of the funnel, then maybe that's the time to take it.
Well, the saying here is, it's rocket fuel, and you need to know you have a rocket, right? So what was this, jalopy or whatever, the startup non-rocket yet, baling wire and bubble gum, kind of thing. How long did it take for you to get to that kind of maturity level, that first level where you say, all right, we know what kind of customer to sell to. We know how to sell it generally. We know generally how to price it. They're happy, product market fit 1.0, which can be very messy to get there.
Yeah. I think product market fit probably quite quickly. So I'm
Okay.
probably gonna say 12 or 18 months, to the point where we had a business that we understood, if you like, the mechanics of the business and whether it
Right.
was operating efficiently. I was gonna say more 4 or 5 years, really, because
Yeah.
uh, I think there's two things. You have a product market fit, but, and this will definitely resonate with some of your listeners,
Mhm.
selling to your ICP, not always adhered to by founders,
Oh
because
my
they
gosh.
go, "Oh my god, we need to get some money in. All right,
Yeah.
this company
Yes.
said they want it. I'll sell it to them." And actually, not a good idea. So learning to qualify opportunities against your ICP, that takes a little bit of time, I think. And
Yeah.
then as your ICP changes, as well as your product
Yeah.
matures, so
Yeah.
I think that was a sort of evolving thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the maturity of the business,
Would you say that was just an old habit of selling to those who want to buy, or cash survival requirement? Or was it just the, let's
um,
say, undisciplined pursuit of customers? For a
I
while.
I I would say I would say probably, I wouldn't say it's ill-disciplined, because we probably knew
Yeah, okay.
that it wasn't a good fit. If we were all being honest with each other, we'd probably say we knew that wasn't a good fit, but it was a deal
Yeah,
and we could close the deal,
yeah.
you know, but you
Well, there's
learn.
a time where survival is more important than perfection, right?
Yeah,
So, customer funding, requires a little craziness in the beginning, just,
yeah. And it can definitely bend you out of shape, and if I did it again, I had my time again, I'd probably be a little bit more ruthless on qualifying
Okay.
some of those early deals.
Oh, I could hear
Uh,
you as an advisor, and, you're that ironic thing, a mostly bootstrapped, founder now that you're an investor in, a dozen companies and advising a lot of these. I'm sure you're helping the founders with this focus therapy, I call it,
yeah.
right? Finding it there because it's the F word, of course.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
as you sold to your network and got your first customers there, and you kinda got to a pretty stable product and all 3 of you could sell pretty well, I guess. How did you get it up to 5 or 10 million ARR? Did you start hiring salespeople, and did they outbound or go to conferences? Or, like, how did you build that, first revenue surge?
Yeah, well, I think probably in the very early days, it was myself and Mark, one of my co-founders, who were out selling. And I think I was probably the solution engineer, and he was
The
the
SE,
account
right.
exec.
Mhm.
So that was in the early days, and then we hired salespeople, we hired solution engineers, we hired outbound business development reps, we hired, and we just built that up slowly. But yeah, Mark and I were involved in sales, all the way through,
Yeah,
all the way through. We might not have been running the actual managing the opportunity, but we'd be involved. We'd get brought in, we would do the go no go calls. We would review,
yeah,
we'd
uh-huh,
get involved
yeah,
because I think I think maybe when maybe we were getting to the point where actually founders shouldn't be involved in sales, but sometimes on the big deals we
yeah,
would get involved.
yeah,
They were material, and hopefully we had a positive impact in a sales situation.
right.
Um, but we had, by the end of it, we probably had about 9 AEs, probably I'm thinking now, across US and UK and Germany. And then solution engineers, we worked on a ratio of about one solution engineer to two AEs, and then we had one BDR to two AEs kind of ratio as well.
And was it mostly that sales-led motion, meaning kind of outbound, the BDRs would identify some potentials and start outreaching and warm them up for your account executives, or
To a
did you
degree, but we did the whole conferences, we did
Okay, right,
demand gen, we tried to drive inbound. Inbounds, you get a lot more inbound than you'll get outbound,
right.
so doing a lot of product marketing, a lot of demand gen,
Okay, the whole marketing
the
stack,
whole
you got
marketing,
the yeah,
ABM
yeah,
stuff we
yeah,
did, we would do the whole lot because I think an inbound from Salesforce would be a lower quality, but an inbound from our website would be a higher quality.
yeah,
There's a lot of customers doing desk research now, so, you've got to be front of mind with them. So getting your message and your marketing machine right means that when they're in a buying cycle, "Oh, I remember Kimble," so
yeah, mhm.
outbound, you're gonna be so lucky if you hit somebody who's in a buying cycle by going outbound to them, so it's more about getting your brand out there and your recognition, so when they are in a buying cycle,
Right.
you're gonna be there, you're gonna catch them.
So was Mark the CRO had sales and marketing, weren't
He
there?
he was to start with, and then we bought in, yeah, he was to start with, but then we bought in, marketing, and we actually, by the end of it, had a head of sales as well. So
And
we didn't have a CRO that looked after marketing. We had a CMO and we had a CSO,
right.
um, and that was deliberate. That was a deliberate strategy to have
And
the
so this is an interesting question. Should I put them together? Because then it's more unified and you don't have 2 people arguing with each other. Do you create them separate because they're so different and you can't find experts that can do both well? How did you guys think about, uh, dividing the revenue responsibility, marketing and sales into
I,
2
I
different
yeah, I think there's a different skill set
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
And I think if you've got I think you have really good sales leads that are very good at selling and managing sales teams,
yeah,
and
uh-huh,
that's got a real value. I don't think those people necessarily have got
no,
the same skills to do marketing. And,
almost never, that yeah,
yeah, and,
and vice versa, yeah,
I know there's a lot of business out there will say CRO, you need to push them together, but I think there's always gonna be a healthy tension there,
yeah,
right? And my job was to manage that tension.
okay.
But I think,
So you could referee and manage that, systematically,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
But I think the skill sets are different. Maybe I mean, there's probably some good CROs out there that have got both skills.
yeah.
Um but personally, I think that's probably hard to find.
What was a characteristic of not your ICP? Let's go to the opposite, your non-ICP. I call them CCPs, crappiest customer profile, the ones that you should stay away with. Please don't sell them. I'm not gonna pay you commission if you sell them because it won't work and it's gonna cost us a lot. Really costly inside the business. What were a couple characteristics that you identified that said, "No, stop the sales process. This isn't gonna work."
I think if we're not talking to the right individuals in an organization, I think is key. So you could have somebody that is,
Right.
is a manager of the professional services unit,
Love it. Right.
but they're not the ultimate decision maker or the ultimate authority. So I think the who you're talking to, I think, is really a red flag. If you're not talking, ultimately in a big, an organization, the software we're selling, you'd be surprised if you get away without talking to the CFO.
Yeah.
Now sometimes you can, and that's great, but so I think if you recognize you're not talking to the right people, I think people who are thinking they're implementing a solution that is just about implementing the product rather than the business change and the outcomes that they want. If you're talking to people and they just think, "Oh, no, it's implementation. We just got to implement this product," you go, "I ain't going to get adopted." There's
Oh,
a change program needed here that the person you're selling to needs to understand that. And if they don't understand that, that's a big red flag.
okay.
You know,
Great. So this thing grew up and in 2019, so that's, 8, 9, 8, years later, um, you took a little private equity investment, minority investment from Accel-KKR,
yeah.
one of the largest software private equity, players that have been around for a while. They buy some of the bigger companies out there. Maybe this was a small one for them. What made you do that and decide to work with them?
So it was 2018.
Okay.
We felt we got the business. We were doing about 9 million sterling revenues at that
Mhm.
point, so about $12
Yeah.
million, something like
Mhm.
that. We felt two things really. One, we think we knew the mechanics of the business at that point. Um, and then secondly, we felt we would like to de-risk ourselves a
Yeah,
little bit,
okay.
take some
Yeah,
money off the table.
yeah,
So, we did have some advisors then, and we did a little bit of a beauty parade in the US and in the UK to growth equity stroke private equity.
yeah.
So the AKKR fund that invested the minority investment in us was their what they call their growth equity
Yeah, the
fund, but
minority folks,
but
yes,
the
right, they
minority, smaller, blah, blah, blah.
much more
Um,
polite and friendly to founders,
yeah, yeah,
minority guys.
yeah. But we had a few offers at that point in time. We chose AKKR. We took some money off the table, so we sort of de-risked it, sort of dusted ourselves down and go, "Right, well, another 3 years," kinda,
Yeah, yeah,
but we took some money off the table, but we also took some growth, some primary as
yeah.
part of that to inject into the business. And we offered the secondary to our angels. So we basically
Oh,
said to
nice.
our angels,
Yeah,
"We're taking this as a percentage of our holding. You can take the same." So we gave more an option. You can take some secondary, you
yeah.
can do nothing, or you can take up your preemption and invest alongside AKKR. So we tried to be all the way along, be really fair with our angels and saying, whatever we're doing, you can do,
That's very nice.
and we thought that was the fairest thing to do. As I think some angel investors, I've seen this a little bit, the founders may take a whole load of money off the table, and the angel investors are
I
sitting there
know.
going, "Well, what about me?"
Yeah, I
Um,
totally get it.
yeah.
That's how a lot of, investors buy in, right? It's a little payoff for the CEO and, that's how they get into something that's, succeeding already. Did your, growth a lot of founders get to, 10 million ARR and, the growth equity guys are there saying, "Well, we can, you know, you can de-risk, take some money off the table. You can get a little bit of funding, not a VC level funding, just a little pile of funding for your efficient growth. And now we're gonna play this, let's grow 3 to 5 times in 3 to 5 years and sell it again and start the, private equity kinda sale march." Or maybe there's a strategic out there. How much primary did you take? How much money to fund growth of the business did you take?
I think it was about $10 million at that
Okay,
point.
that's not
Yeah.
small. Yeah.
No, not small, and,
Yeah.
so and I think that was well, we had a we know we needed to invest in the US. We'd g
Yeah.
Mark, my co-founder, he went and lived in the US for a bit. We were
Ah,
and that was really important in the early days, but we
yeah.
know we needed to hire more people in the US. We were getting big in Germany. We needed people. So there was lots of reasons that we knew how we would spend the money,
Okay.
and we could see that we could be pretty efficient with it. So yeah, so that's when we felt it was the right time to take
And
it.
you were, say, break even and growing, and you decided to have a little loss to invest, right? That you knew would pay back with an acceleration, something like that. Did that work out like you
Yeah,
expected?
I think broadly, I mean, nothing's ever exactly, is it? But,
There we go,
you know,
right?
but yeah, I think we I think the important thing is, Greg, we knew the levers on the business by that point. So we thought we can
Yes.
go loss making, but we know if we ever need to pull this lever back,
Yeah.
we can turn either cash neutral, cash generation, or profit. We knew the levers to pull. And I
Yeah.
think that's the important thing.
And you are in fact, like, in the lever pulling business, right? You are saying, "We for a professional service firm, we'll give you the levers, right, to
Yeah.
manage your business. Go faster, slower, right, and here's how you do it through the
Yeah.
windshield." So you guys were pretty savvy about that.
There's an expression in the UK that might not translate, eating your own dog food.
Yeah, we
We
got
ran
first.
the
Yeah.
business
Yes.
on our own software, but I used to turn it and say we drink our own champagne rather than eat our own dog food. But yeah, we
Of
did.
course
So
you did.
I
Yes. Well, great.
yeah,
So, did your world change when you invited these serious experience growth equity finance types, right? That's a financial type buyer. Did you had a new board, dynamic. You had very smart people making suggestions about how to run your business from their spreadsheets far away, or how did your business change with private equity? That's a big fear for control oriented
yeah, and
founders.
I think, it definitely changed. Of course it
Okay.
did, and we sort of went into that eyes wide open. I would
Yeah.
probably say in hindsight, more was in my head than was in reality. You know, you I think you overthink what yeah, I think what you have to understand, or, not you personally, but one has to understand, is that most of the people in those investment firms are investors. They're not operators. They don't
Right.
know how to run a business. They
Right.
know how to invest. They're bloody good at spreadsheets,
Yeah.
and they're great at, a waterfall and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to operate the business. But in your mind, you think because they've invested in so many of these businesses that they know how to operate. I don't they pattern match.
Right.
They pattern match, and they try and get every business to look the same in terms of the metrics. But actually, it can't do that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
you can assess a business by the metrics, but you don't know how to operate a business by them.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I think that was the interesting
That's
thing
really important.
that
Yeah,
you
and, for founders at this stage, they actually need to combine their savvy about operating the business, the charm and the magic inside the business and growing through phases with some of that standard financial alignment, right? They need to know both sides of that equation to mix them together in the right way and not just go one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think, so I think there is lots. I mean, the good thing about sort of Accel-KKR was you get to meet other portfolio,
Ah,
CEOs, CROs, and there's definitely stuff you can learn there, and
yeah.
they will facilitate that introduction, and yeah, and they've got a consulting group, and I would say the consulting group are mixed in terms of what they're able to offer you as a portfolio firm,
Yeah.
but I think being able to talk to other and I ended up doing this myself anyway, is finding other founders in London that, were in a similar situation, and we would meet for beers and
Yes,
chat
of
and
course.
share ideas, and we'd be on WhatsApp together. "Oh, have you had
Yeah.
this problem?"
Yep.
That's valuable, being able to talk to other people in the same, especially as and this sound terrible to, other founders who aren't CEOs. I think it's a lonely job as a CEO
Of
sometimes.
course. Yeah.
And I think being able to talk to somebody else who's in a similar position often can be, cathartic to a degree.
Well, that's, the main reason I have my practical founder peer groups with Simon and others, right?
Yeah.
They're hearing from other founders, 'ca about their unique stories and their unique approaches and all of these. Sean, what is most unique about you now that you've done this you've gone on these journeys and you've learned something about yourself? Like, what is your superpower, or what is it that, you discovered that you do extremely well that isn't normal, out there?
Well, I don't think there's any actually, but,
Okay.
the only thing I would say, and I think all founders have to be like this, you have to be passionate and, dedicated to it. And well, I suppose I like problem solving,
Yeah.
and so if I know there's a problem, I have to fix that problem or have help people fix the problem, and that
Right.
that for me, if I see a problem, I that we need to sort that out, whatever part of the business it's in,
Kind of the
and
firefighter, and that's what consulting is, which is,
yeah.
attacking the hardest problem that nobody wants to attack, and,
Yeah, and then
like,
enabling people for them to fix it or for you to help them fix it, I think that's important. If you just sweep it under the carpet, it's gonna come back and bite you, so you have to attack these things, where there's a problem, wherever it is in the business, you've got to attack it and not be scared of attacking it, I think.
right.
Um,
Well, let's skip forward. I know you sold the company and it merged with Maven Link, and now it's called Kontata, Kantata,
yeah.
and it's rebranded and you're not involved anymore. What is it like to be on the other side of all your crazy journeys, and now you've won a prize and, you're a little older and your kids are a little older and all of that. What's it like out there? And you started a new company, and what keeps you busy?
What keeps you busy? I do some angel investing, so try and support the UK tech scene by investing through EIS
Yeah.
predominantly,
Okay.
into that. I do some advisory, so live, I guess, vicariously through other
Yes.
founders. So I don't get the sleepless nights and I don't get the
Yeah.
stress about meeting payroll, but I get to enjoy the growth journey vicariously. Um, a big education. I did an MIT course in AI, in artificial intelligence recently. I thought I need to understand this.
Mhm.
Um, I'm in the very early stages of building a social enterprise, which is in something completely different. It's in hydroponics, plant flower growing rather than tech. So that's been occupying me, and yeah, always got a hunger for learning. So I haven't coded for about 20, well, a long time, Greg,
Mhm.
but I've just got this little pet project where I'm doing some coding at the moment, which has been very enjoyable. It's that building something that's the itch that you need to scratch, or I need to scratch, is
Yeah.
that building something.
Do you
Uh,
think you'll start, it's a new playing field for software companies with, AI and other things going on. Can you see yourself, getting the band back together, or, starting
um,
another?
Well, actually, Mark and I work on a few things, helping companies together. So we spend a fair bit of time talking and helping companies together.
Yeah.
Um, Dave, I see reasonably regularly for breakfast and coffee, but I don't think we'll get that band back together. Never say never. I might, as you alluded to, it's so easy to build stuff now.
Yeah.
Um, the challenge with that is, can you build a defensive moat around anything,
Right.
from a business
Yeah.
perspective? I think that's more of a challenge now than it ever has been, but to get a product or to get something built is a lot easier. So there's gotta be, so I'm
Yeah.
never say never, but I'm enjoying the portfolio career, I suppose, at the moment,
Yeah.
and doing some personal stuff as well.
That's, commonly called the grandparent, not the parent, right? You
Yeah.
could swoop in and, and leave, right? "See you later,"
Yeah, yeah.
so that's great. So, my last question, Sean, you're talking to a lot of founders, you've gained a lot of wisdom. What is the most common piece of advice that you give to founders that you could share with practical founders out there who are building, software? Maybe it came out of their own services business and may or may not be in Salesforce or on a platform, but what is the most common advice you give to founders that's useful?
I think you said it before. Focus, focus, focus. I
Mm.
think it's ruthless execute. Once you know where you're going, it's that ruthless execution and not getting distracted with some shiny thing over here or something over there. And I think there's a lot of founders that because they're entrepreneurial,
Yes.
there's a tendency for, oh, we could do that or we could do that. But actually, I think, once you're locked and loaded on your ICP and, product market fits there, I think you've got to be heads down and focus and maybe come up for air when, you've achieved certain things, come up for air there. But I think the distraction is obviously often the biggest crippler for organizations, I think.
Yeah, and we say it, and it's hard, and because we've lived it, right? You can't scale something that's still ADD going in every direction, right? That's still startup messy. It doesn't scale, and they get stuck. But it's really hard for founders to hear. They're like, "Oh yeah, I don't have that problem," or whatever. But you got your business to 30 million in revenue. Do you feel like this is an irony, but your business was probably more focused about who you served and how you did things and what the process was at 30 million than it was at 3 million.
Yeah, yeah, probably. I think there's a little bit of pivoting, and
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
fine. I
Yeah.
think but it's sort of is it a pivot like that or is it a pivot like that? I think that the degree of pivot, if it's sort of like course correction, then
Yeah.
that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's learning. But I
Right.
think sort of, oh, let's go and set up in Australia, or let's go, that's a distraction. Where if you're in a market where there's plenty of addressable market
Right.
there, get that right, get your sales engine right before you go off to another country. There's a real often a sort of a pride about putting a flag in the ground in all these countries, and no, you haven't got it right in your home country yet, let alone where you want to be, so
Awesome.
you have to get the model right, and then you can start to go to other countries. I
Did
think.
you just, speaking of that, you started in the UK, it's very common. We're gonna do this US assault in the big market. Did you feel like you got to, scale, out in the US, eventually? Or
Yeah, I think we did eventually. We were probably pulled into the US. So, despite what I just said, I think we were actually pulled into the US
okay,
because
that's
of
one
being
way
on
to
the
do it.
Salesforce platform. But
Yeah.
our way of coping with that was to make sure one of either me or Mark, one of the founders, was there, so we could make sure there was the same culture, the same approach, the same learnings, the same processes in both countries. We weren't
I
diverging
see. Right.
because that would have been disastrous for us. We would have burnt so much money. We would have,
Yeah.
so I think we probably went earlier than we would have liked, but we were getting demand and we were getting pulled there. So going back to my earlier point of, chasing the deals. Um,
Yeah.
but I think we did, yeah. So we were about 50-50 by the time we did the majority deal. We're about 50% of our revenues in the US and 50% in Europe.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so that
That's
was
great.
UK and Germany, predominantly in Europe, but we had a few other uh, customers in other countries, but predominantly UK and Germany was about 50-50 with the US. So we got to a point where, the revenues were starting to be more from the US than Europe,
Okay, look at
which it
that.
should
A
be. I
lot of
mean,
maturity in this business. It's not a crazy startup. You got through a lot of phases of growth and built a very valuable company and de-risked and eventually sold the majority, and you still have money on the table with this, that private equity multiple bite scheme. So
yeah.
congratulations on a successful journey, right? All things considered in hindsight, right? So congratulations. That's very
Thank
exciting.
thank you.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
it.
sharing your story on the Practical
You're
Founders
very
podcast.
welcome.
Yeah,
If anything I can do to help founders, I know I've got the scars on my back, so I know
I
what it's
know.
like. And that's what you're doing as well. So it's great. You've got to help these people, haven't you?
All right. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Sean. Cheers.
Great. Cheers, Greg.
Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.